We thought Turkey would be affordable. We arrived expecting a budget-friendly adventure and left having spent more than we anticipated. But here's the twist. The grand total still managed to surprise us. Today, we're laying it all bare. Every single Singapore dollar we spent across 17 days in one of the world's most extraordinary countries. Hello, and welcome back to Tales of Two Travelers. Over Christmas and New Year of 2025 and 2026, we've visited Turkey for the first time. Across 17 days, we explored 4 cities, ate far too many simit, and drank what felt like an endless river of chai. Before the numbers, a few caveats. We haven't included the cost of flights into and out of Turkey, as these vary considerably depending on where you're traveling from. All figures are in Singapore dollars. Please convert to your own currencies as needed. We traveled in the winter, which is generally a low season in Turkey, so accommodation cost may be lower than what you'd find in the summer. Inflation in Turkey remains elevated, so the figures may have shifted by the time you watch this. Always do your own research closer to your travel dates. And finally, do give us a like and subscribe if you think that this kind of video would help you in budgeting and planning for your next trip. Right, let's get into it. As we spent one night of an overnight bus traveling between Cappadocia and Selçuk, we only stayed for 16 nights in total. The two of us paid 1,170 Singapore dollars in total, averaging about 72 Singapore dollars per night for a couple, or roughly 600 Singapore dollars per person for nearly 3 weeks. As you would expect, Istanbul and Cappadocia were the priciest. Istanbul averaged 86 Singapore dollars per night for two, while Cappadocia came in at 112 Singapore dollars per night. Partly because even a non-cave hotel option commands a premium in that region. A genuine cave hotel would push that figure higher still. None of our hotels were luxury properties, but all were clean, well located, and gave us very little to complain about. Accommodation made up 22% of our total budget. And no, despite what you might expect, it wasn't our biggest category. We'll let you know soon. We'll be honest, we gave ourselves permission to eat freely on this trip. And given that Turkish food turned out to be an absolute revelation, we have zero regrets about that decision. Total food spent? 1,236 Singapore dollars across 17 days, or about 71 Singapore dollars per day for two. In Istanbul, a casual meal for two at a lokanta or a restaurant on the Asian side will typically run between 15 and 20 Singapore dollars. A mid-tier restaurant sits at around 40 Singapore dollars for two, while a proper splurge, a fine dinner, or an elaborate Turkish breakfast can easily hit 100 Singapore dollars or more. Cappadocia charges a slight premium across the board. Selçuk and Izmir tend to be a little more forgiving. The biggest pressure on our food budget wasn't only the sit-down meals, but also the snacking. Simit, borek, pide, kunefe, baklava, dondurma, lahmacun. Turkey is essentially a continuous edible obstacle course, and we failed to resist them at every turn. Our coffee bill alone came to 114 Singapore dollars. Nope, we're not apologizing for this. At 23% of our total spend, food narrowly edged out accommodation. And again, surprisingly, only the second highest. The next one is definitely the most expensive category of our visit to Turkey. Turkey is extraordinarily rich in history and landscape, and the entry fees reflect that. Hierapolis entry fee was 60 Singapore dollar per person. Ephesus, 80 Singapore dollars per person. A tourist hammam, upwards of 100 Singapore dollars per person. Though we found a local hammam at a fraction of that price, which we'd strongly recommend seeking out. In total, we spent just under 1,500 Singapore dollars on experiences, 27% of our entire budget and the largest category of the trip. The biggest individual cost was our walking tour in Istanbul at 315 Singapore dollars per person. That figure sounds steep at first glance, but it's worth understanding that it included an entry to Hagia Sophia, the Basilica Cistern, and Topkapi Palace, which, if purchased separately, would have cost around 230 Singapore dollars per person anyway. The tour itself added context and depth that made these places genuinely come alive. For a first visit to Turkey, these 3 sites are essentially non-negotiable, so factoring them into a guided experience made both financial and practical sense. Moving around Turkey wasn't cheap, but it was manageable. Total transport span was 843 Singapore dollars, making up 16% of the budget. Within Istanbul and Izmir, we used the Istanbul card and Izmirim card respectively, reloadable cards that cover metro, tram, and bus networks within each city. Between the two, we spent about 87 Singapore dollars. We also took taxis and Uber for 6 separate journeys, totaling 264 Singapore dollars. A significant sum largely because Istanbul's airport sits very far from the city center, and those transfers add up quickly. For intercity travel, a flight from Istanbul to Cappadocia cost 111 Singapore dollars per person. An overnight bus from Cappadocia to Seljuk was 25 Singapore dollars per person. Remarkably good value for a journey that also saved us a night's accommodation. And a flight from Izmir back to Istanbul came to 45 Singapore dollars per person. In Seljuk, we hired a car for 2 days to visit Ephesus and Pamukkale. The total cost was 325 Singapore dollars, shared across a group of 5, bringing it to about 65 Singapore dollars per person. Shopping is entirely optional, of course, but Turkey makes it very difficult to leave empty-handed. We spent 655 Singapore dollars picking up hammam accessories, clothing, flavored teas, salep, and books. All things that now serve as tangible reminders of a brilliant trip. For what we spent, we came home with a generous haul. One note, none of it was purchased from the Grand Bazaar. If you do choose to shop there, come prepared. Haggling isn't just expected, it's essentially part of the experience. Sharpen your negotiating skills before you go. 17 days, 4 cities, 2 travelers. Our total spend was 5,530 Singapore dollars, excluding flight. Per person, it was approximately 2,765 Singapore dollars. Per person per day, roughly 163 Singapore dollars. Honestly, we were bracing for more. The individual experience cost, paid in one go at each site, had created a psychological impression that everything was eye-wateringly expensive. But when the full picture came together, it landed at a figure that felt, all things considered, quite fair for what we experienced. Turkey gave us more than we expected, historically, culinarily, and culturally, and the numbers reflect the trip that we experienced fully and without too many compromises. We hope this breakdown gives you an honest, practical starting point for planning your own Turkey adventure. Were you surprised by the grand total? Do you think Turkey counts as an expensive destination? Let us know in the comments. We genuinely love reading them. If you find this useful, a like or a subscribe means a great deal to us and helps us keep making content like this. Until next time, Tales of Two Travelers out.